All right. Hey, everybody. I am back. Actually, we're back, and I'm pleased once again. I'm really, Dr. Balan, happy that you're here again to talk about this. And I always say Digu, but I'm afraid all the time that I'm mispronouncing it. So again, so
Well,
I
it's Duygu Balan, yes.
say that really slow for me.
Duygu, as if you say
Digu.
to go somewhere, but it ends with a U, so Duygu.
So it's a high U sound.
Yeah,
Digu.
it's a Turkish word, actually. It's a Turkish word for emotion. So my parents must have known that I'd be working on and dealing with emotions most of
Dweegu.
my life. Yeah.
If I say Dweegu, I'm not speaking out of turn.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great
Dweego,
pronunciation.
thank you. Wow. That is a unique. That's the most unique name I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I have Xenophon Abraham. Go figure. So outstanding. Hey, Dweego, last time I had you on, we were talking about mommy issues.
Yes.
I thought I was the perfect candidate to interview you in that
It's one
regard.
of my favorite topics.
But but I one of my commenters is picked up in the hilarity. He says, "Teach us how to Dweego." So anyway, thank you. Uh, and I think that actually adds to something. You mentioned the pandemic
Yes.
when we talked, and that's my question. How has the pandemic affected us psychologically?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's undeniable that the pandemic affected us psychologically and continues to affect us psychologically, even though seemingly we have returned to mostly a normal way of living or the way that it was previously. Um, and you don't really need to be like a trauma therapist to know that there's traumatic events that people are that there's a global traumatization in the aftermath of the pandemic, and the way that it affected people was just so enormously different. And in some ways I think it also amplified the difference in class. So those people who didn't have the resources, maybe didn't have social networks, maybe already didn't have mental health services or medical services in place, were affected by it much worse than people who had all these services in place. For instance, people who lived in neighborhoods that where they could have pods with their neighbors, and or had access to outdoors, that were maybe they had backyards, or they were able to work from home, like the laptop um, employed, like people who can do just work on their laptops. It was very different for them than people who lost their jobs, or people who had jobs that require for them to be in person, like hairdressers, for instance, or essential care workers who are in very high stress job environments, risking their lives. So it's just the effects were just so different than one another.
Uh, can you talk to me more about what kinds of changes or have hurt us? And here's where I'm going to explain where I'm going with this. Um, I keep coming back to this in my head. I actually mentioned it, I think, briefly when we talked about before. But Doc, all around the world, our economy has been cut off by at the knees because we
Mhm.
had stay-ins. You couldn't go out.
Yeah.
Business shutting down. And now we have what I consider to be a fake economic recovery because you have so many people suffering, and then they're in fear because rent protections are about to go away under this idea that things are coming back. But then you still see people on the street. And I feel like we're being collectively lied to, and that the whole, or maybe we just don't understand what's really happened to us as a society, because now it feels like the American standard of living is being pulled down at a rapid rate. And a lot of people think that. And I'm wondering how much of this is a reaction to, it's fear because we haven't done what we used to do to get out of these situations. And then we were in the situation and didn't know how to get out of it. And the watchword for all this is just constant anxiety.
Yes. Definitely. There was a lot of fear. I think a lot of repetitive fear and a lot of unknown. So it was very bleak and there was no end in sight. So that's why the anxiety actually increased significantly. And in the aftermath, actually, the anxiety of returning back to our so-called normal life, or returning back to work, returning back to extracurricular activities, also created an anxiety for many people. So it was kind of twofold, where initially the anxiety was not having that regular structure, that day to day that we were accustomed to. But then once the pandemic was over and there was more possibilities to return to work and socialize, then the anxiety became about not having the resources, or people may have changed lifestyles. There was a lot of people who made this fear-based decisions and made really big lifestyle changes. Accordingly, some people moved away to families. Some people moved away very far from their jobs. So that all of that caused a lot of stress in the aftermath, and kind of a need for reevaluating their lives and maybe rebuilding their lives. And that this is a very hard thing to do, especially for those who don't necessarily have social support networks in place or resources in place.
And now it seems like, and you mentioned uh, this matter of post, but is it? Here's another fear-based question: is the pandemic really over? How do we know when it's? How do we know that it's over because we're not infected, or you know, where is that? And then how do we cope with all this? What's the best coping mechanism for all of this that's happening around us?
Yeah.
Or is there one? I don't know. That's why I'm turning to you.
Well, that's a good question. So, I mean, I am not a doctor, so I don't really know the medical aspect of this. Just from my own life experience and from what I'm seeing, it seems like there's still COVID. It doesn't seem like there are as many hospitalizations, but as I said, I mean, it's just limited to my experience and the people that I'm exposed to. So, but in general, life does seem that schools are open. There's people are having their social events like they used to. So it seems like life has resumed in some ways, but it would be it's undeniable the effects that continue. For instance, germ phobia has increased a lot, especially in children. Actually, I see that where kids are much more worried about germs than they were before. And especially during our childhood, I don't remember being worried about germs the way that children today are worried about being infected, disinfecting everything constantly. And this really affects like obsessive compulsive behaviors in association to this. And has also been a lot of guilt associated with the pandemic in a way that wasn't there before. For instance, because of the asymptomatic spread, we all were so concerned about carrying germs to people who were vulnerable, the elderly, for instance, right? Like that stress, I think, really changed the way we relate, we connect with our surroundings, and the way that we internalize the blame for illness. So that was not really the case pre-pandemic, but now we all are very aware and very conscious about this. And sometimes there's ruminating thoughts about this, or this internalized excess guilt, which later turns to shame, because guilt is when we do something wrong and shame is when we are wrong. So in that sense, the pandemic actually really left a lot of scars in our psyches.
And something else too, I have to point out when I go, I find this fascinating. And it seems to me almost a child of this, but I'm happy to be wrong and I want to share it with you. But it's it's next door, and the kind of conversations and uh, when I go to next door, it's like constant fear, especially in the Oakland contest in particular. Like I just went there just right now, uh, just to see what pop up when I went in the news feed. And actually, here it is. And here's somebody I know, Lynn Raphael, who is talking about the district attorney. And if I zoom in and scroll down here, and one more time here, um, and then once more with feeling, just so that it can be seen easier. I don't know how if you can see that or not.
Yeah, okay, I can see it.
Yeah. And then I scroll down. Oops, excuse me. It's past the ad there. Well, that's good. And then someone looking for a secure mailbox
Yes.
because keys are stolen. And then there's this other entry where Amazon package was delivered to the wrong place. There's constant, trying to call 911. I didn't have to go far in this to see examples of people in fear, right? And it's constantly communicated through social media. Talking about the delays here. Here's Lynn, chiming in. That's that's interesting. And then this
An
one.
unknown insect, yeah.
Yeah. But then this one, a day ago, my girlfriend almost got kidnapped.
Oh.
Yeah, she was leaving work and stopped in a Michael's craft store, and then went to Target across the street. She was approached by a man who looked like they were in their 30s with short black hair. This is actually long, and in with a braided beard, and then went halfway down his torso. Jeez. The man said he saw her leaving Michael's and thought it would be a good idea to follow her and approach her in Target to tell her he saw her leaving Michael's and wanted to tell her she's beautiful and wants to talk to her. And she kindly told him how uncomfortable the situation was and please leave her alone. She got the creeps and decided to leave Target without checking out. While she was driving home, she looked back and noticed he was following her in a gunmetal Prius. When she got to a red light, he got out of his car, oh boy, and approached her. So she took off and ran through the light to get away safely. Wow. Please be on the lookout. So yeah. Yeah. White male, black hair, white shirt, age 30s. I mean, this is look, we didn't have to go far to see this, I mean, this is wild.
Yes. I mean, fear is contagious. It spreads. And it's the thing about these kind of platforms is that it can actually really create a sense of community. And especially during the pandemic, when the sense of community was shattered, actually it was useful to share resources and just to share emotions regarding what was happening and information. But it also can, of course, feed fear and feed into anxiety. Yeah. So it's important to kind of be able to filter, like in anything, filter and take the things that are actually going to be useful and helpful, and then just have the skills to not allow the fear to dictate our lives. So not internalize the fear that's around us. Because if we look for it, there's so many things to constantly worry.
Right. That's what how do we get to a place where we're healthy? Because I feel like we're not. For me, I have to go back at some point to my place in Oakland. I'm actually afraid to go back because I don't know. Last time I did, I may have mentioned this before, but the car window was shattered in. I just went to the alley for 40 minutes and went to order dinner at Miss Saigon, 2 doors down. For those of you watching, that's 3300 Grand Avenue for 3325 Grand Avenue for the alley, and then Miss Saigon is just 2 doors up But excellent food. But at any rate, yeah, I came out. There was nothing to steal,
Yeah.
but it was a hole, and I had never had that happen before, and I felt violated.
Yes, of course.
And then, and that was before the pandemic, right? That
Yes.
was that was November 20th, 2019. Actually, that was a few days before that. But my point is that, but that was 2019 November, after the Raiders game, because I took in my godparents back to their place, actually Libby's parents, our former mayor now, and then went to do this. And my point is that if it was that bad then, and now it seems like it's worse, what
Yeah.
what does one do to cope? How do you get rid of the fear?
That's actually a really good point, because when we're continuously in traumatic situations, when we live in dangerous neighborhoods or are in abusive households, it is impossible to talk about healing trauma. So I think that's a very important discussion, because to heal trauma, we have to, so it's all about the nervous system. So we have to be able to regulate our nervous system and feel safe. And that's how we can actually process difficult emotions that weren't able to be processed before. However, if the trauma continues, like for children who continuously live in abusive households, or people who are continuously in toxic relationships, for instance, it's really impossible to heal trauma. So that is a different type of, for instance, in psychotherapy, that's a different type of therapy, where you can't really do deep trauma work. You do crisis intervention when someone is in like a dangerous situation. So similarly, I think when we look at it in a society level, it's important to treat it as a crisis intervention,
Hmm.
so that healing and becoming healthier communities is actually possible.
Have you found, or how has the pandemic changed your profession, what you do in terms of clients coming in?
So it changed it in an interesting way, actually. So I used to see patients face to face. I had an office. Actually, I had signed a lease for my own office 2 weeks prior to the pandemic, so I never really got to use it. Um, and I was renting someone else's before. So it was interesting how, and then all of a sudden everything turned remote. And initially I was worried of how that was going to work out, especially with couples.
Hmm.
But to my surprise, it actually went pretty well. I think, of course, having a therapy room is different. Going somewhere else for therapy has a whole different experience, because the room is a part of the process too. And obviously, eye contact is not really possible through video. And also, just being in the same room makes a difference, of course. But to my surprise, the effects of therapy were continuously beneficial.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of clients actually who I've never met in person still.
Hmm.
And yeah, so in my case, it changed. It was because I'm Turkish and I work with a lot of Turkish speaking clients. It made it so that I'm much more accessible now. So I'm licensed in California and in New York. So I can see. So before, location made a difference. So I had people drive for 2 hours just to see me. So now I can see people who live anywhere in California and anywhere in New York. So it kind of made accessibility to a Turkish-speaking therapist, for instance, much more. And there was some benefits of the pandemic similar to this, where even if in your local area you don't have, for instance, certain groups, you can still have access to them online, because a lot of things are now virtual. Or, if you need a therapist from a certain cultural background, and if it's not accessible in the area that you live, now because of the remote virtual therapy, there's a lot more availability and a lot more therapists that would meet your needs.
Hey, I'm curious, as I listened to you, something really came over my brain. Um, the the Turkish earthquake.
Yes,
Did
that's
did that have an impact on your clients that came in, since you said a lot of them were Turkish?
Of course. Yes, it definitely made because a lot of people lost loved ones. A lot of people were worried about the people, their families. So of course and also, when you're so far away and something so devastating happens, it has a different effect than when you're in it with other people. Then there's a certain maybe internalized guilt of not being able to be there, a feeling of helplessness for not being able to provide support to your family or people who are in need. So yes, most definitely, it affected a lot of the people that I work with. And also with things like this, it's interesting because, you know, for instance, in the therapist client relationship, there's always the therapist's needs are never in the room. It's always about the client, and a lot of the times, even if the client talks about relatable things, relatable dynamics, it's the client's story. But when we're talking about like these big events like earthquake or the pandemic, the therapist is also affected by these life events. So it just creates an interesting dynamic. The pandemic especially was interesting in the sense that I didn't know what to do, and my life was very unpredictable as well. I had family in Turkey as well, like a lot of my patients did, and it was and I was in my home. So it just such a different kind of a connection where we're all in it, and we're processing my client's anxiety, but of course my anxiety and my coping skills are also affected by it. So there was also a sense of togetherness that isn't always in a therapeutic relationship. And similarly with the earthquake, so I had very close friends who are from that area, and of course there was a lot of worry, not being able to get in touch with some people. So that anxiety was also kind of a little bit shared in the therapeutic process.
Yeah, and for me, just watching as others are able to through different types of media, uh, it was shocking to see the level of devastation. You know,
Yes.
and it made me feel like the it shakes one's comfort.
Yes.
You know, because I'm here in Georgia, we have had earthquakes here, and yet because of that, I keep thinking, wow, where else could this happen next? And then not only that, why aren't this is really what got me. Why aren't we doing enough there? It just seemed like we sort of let it happen.
Mhm.
And quite literally we're spectators because of media. And that was about it. I didn't, and I'm happy to be wrong, but it just seemed like the level of aid didn't match the severity of the damage. And I
Mhm.
was wondering that, and this is my fear, that with the pandemic and everything else happening all at once, all this happening at once, it seems like our governments are challenged. And I personally have little faith in in our government's ability to solve problems. I'm not saying I don't believe in government.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's the reverse. I believe in a government ideal, right? But it seems to me that it's almost like we've sort of given up on the idea that we can fix things. And I say that because there's a constant idea now, well, this can't be fixed, that can't be fixed, and yet and people are more concerned about left right issues than nuts and bolts of government now, even people who work in government, right? And yet these are the people that are responsible for our well-being, and all this happens to have happened, to have come as a byproduct of the pandemic. And so it's like a sickness that we're dealing with that we have to cope with as
Yeah.
a collective. Or I mean, I'm happy to be wrong, but it just seems like there's this sense of foreboding out there that, oh, this is the way it is. It's not going to get any better. Bed Bath and Beyond is closing all of its doors, and which is actually true. That's actually a headline story today, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it is because of my profession and my job to look at these things. But I have a fear that we're not going to get over this because
Yeah.
we want to. And I'm again, where is how do I fix myself and get out of that? Aside from going to Disney World.
Well, that's what trauma is actually, right? Trauma is the shattering of the belief that the tools that you have had that worked yesterday are also going to work today. That the world is going to be similar to the way it was yesterday, and that you are still going to have all the support systems and the things that you relied on tomorrow. So that notion was completely shattered with the pandemic, and that is what trauma is. Trauma is that this belief system that the things that we know how life to be will continue, and we will just today will be similar to yesterday, kind of thing. But so that creates, of course, a lot of helplessness, and it also kind of underlines the fact that the idea that humans are powerless against nature, and that it increases that fear, because we create this lifestyle for ourselves where everything is very much in our control, and with any incident that highlights the fact that it isn't, then the anxiety, of course, it increases significantly. Just our daily routines, for instance, the things that we created, the systems we put in place, when it gets disrupted, then we feel completely untethered.
Mhm. Is it a good idea to turn to medication and drugs to overcome these, or should they just call you and have you, on speed dial?
In our society today, I think a lot of the idea of looking at mental health is about a chemical imbalance or the mind being broken. So I actually feel like it's important to do a deep work regardless if we're taking medication or not. So if our symptoms get in the way where we need to take medication, that allows us to actually have the bandwidth to deal with what's actually going on. So it still has to be addressed. It doesn't go away. Our pain doesn't go away, and the dynamics that are toxic don't go away. We still have to do the work and put in the effort. And medication might provide us the space to be able to do that, but it doesn't fix things for you. It's not going to fix our critical inner dialogue. It's going to give us the opportunity to understand why we have such a critical inner dialogue, and to find ways to nourish ourselves and create meaningful relationships.
What is it today in the context of society that I see it where, and I'm happy to be wrong again, it seems like it's harder and harder and harder to make friends with people you can trust. And I'm saying that I'm throwing it out there as it seems like it's a byproduct of what's happened to us. Am I wrong or am I right?
So what do you mean by that? Can you say a little bit more? Like, what do you mean
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, because of economic uncertainty,
yes.
because of, I'll just lay it out there. Okay. What happened was very recently, we had to get 8 plumbers to come through our place because we had a pipe in our basement that went through the concrete. And if you have Home Shield and then also American Home Shield and Home Serve, you have such a construct as we do with a basement and slab and water pipes that go out to a well and so on. Home Serve will not insure the inside of the house, but American Home Shield will not take care of the outside. So because of that, we went to 8 plumbers. Finally, we had one group come by on a Thursday. This was May 11th, and one of the gentlemen a guy named Howard from His and Hers Plumbing, and I've used them publicly, so I have no problem saying this. Said, "Why can't fix that?" But I know someone who can. And but then before that, he wanted my mom to sign this stuff because my mom owns this house. And she says, you haven't done anything. Why should I sign this?" "Oh, it's just for the record." She said, "I'm not going to sign it."
Mm-hmm.
So then he brings this company in, CerClean, that he says can fix the problem. Note, they didn't come by until that next day, but it turned out they were water damage specialists.
Mm-hmm.
They were not plumbers.
Yeah.
But they didn't say, "Hey, look, you know what? We shouldn't be here." All right. They said, "Okay, well, we'll get you a plumber. But meanwhile, we'll hook up all this equipment and, dry out the water." There wasn't any water to dry out that hadn't already been dried out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But they were such good salesmen, we went along with having them hook the things up anyway. And then my mom had said, "These things are powering, they're using energy." I said, "Yeah, you're right." And I looked downstairs and I said, "Yeah, there's nothing wrong, really. I mean," and she said, "Well, can you just turn them off?" I said, "Yeah, I'll just disconnect the whole thing."
Mm-hmm.
And so mom looked them up, and they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different and more complaints.
Yes.
Over the course of this year at that time. Very similar. What they do is they come in, set their machines up, they run them, so you're paying the rent on the machines on a daily basis, and you wind up paying the energy costs on your bill because those doggone things are plugged, in. So I had unplugged them, and I already had them on video, Lance and Rick. And so when James came to get it on Monday, I had it on video too. They sent my mother a $3,417 bill for doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked it up. It turns out this is a scam that goes on. And down here, scams have been rampant. And I'm thinking, and I said to my mom, between the scams and the robberies and around the country and everything else, we're not having a conversation about how the pandemic has impacted where our economy is, because these things are just happening, right? And I'm wondering, what's the psychology of people who feel like they have to do that? What is it that about our mental health? It just feels like it's being hampered by the pandemic. And again, I'm happy to be wrong, but
yeah,
it's crazy what's going on. And I had this had a good story ending because our company and what we do. I basically took my reputation management skills and I turned them inside out. Instead of writing something good, I wrote something bad.
yeah.
And I populated it. And Duygu, it was so rampant that I got a call from another Clear company. I didn't know they were franchises. He said, "That's not us. They're making us look bad." I said, "Well, would you call him and tell him to drop this?" And he did. And that's how it got settled. So I talked to the man. We had a great conversation. We're friends, although I don't consider anybody a full friend who would treat my mom like that or try to.
Mm-hmm.
They dropped it,
Yeah.
but I think it scared the heck out of them because they've been preying on elderly Black women.
Yeah.
Figured out.
Well, I'm glad it worked out and you were able to advocate.
But there's scams. It's like scam. And what is going on? And you see my thought about this, and something's going on out there that we're not addressing, and that's why I want people to watch what we're talking about, and respond to it, because I have this sense that we're having conversations we're having a conversation that's not being had in its entirety. And again, I'm happy to be wrong, doctor.
Yeah.
Am I?
So I mean, I think you're right. These are important conversations to have. And also, I think there's a lot of trauma that we don't classify as trauma, but actually are traumatic experiences. And being scammed is one of them. So when we get scammed, then it's a betrayal of our trust, and it really shatters our understanding of safety and our understanding of what human interactions are supposed to be, and what it means to be in relation or in a community. And so what happens when we're traumatized is that we have emotional responses that might be disproportionate to the current event. So for instance, we might perceive, if there's any triggers that remind us of that moment that we were scammed, we might react in a very mistrust, from a place of mistrust, because we are being triggered, and perceive an unthreatening situation threatening.
Threatening, right?
So then this actually just continues the same narrative, and it results in re-traumatization, and also results in more and more fear-based actions and increased anxiety. And as I said before, it is contagious. So we spread our anxieties and our fears, like in those apps that you just showed next door.
Mhm.
So that ends up just feeding into it, and just like the snowball effect, getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
What's the end of that snowball effect?
The important thing, I think, is to recognize it, and to be able to treat traumatic incidents, even if they are things that aren't necessarily classified as a trauma, to treat the emotional experience for that event, that's connected to that event, so that it doesn't leak into all other incidents or other places in our lives. I think that is the most important thing. And also being an advocate to mental health services, an advocate for these kind of bringing, like just like you did, like bringing out these situations of scamming and bringing awareness and shedding light in the name of prevention, is also helpful. It also gives us a sense of agency and taking control of what's happening. So that is another way of doing it, being open and communicate, instead of the spreading the fear and anxiety. Spreading the information will make a difference.
Yeah, that's what I did, because I said to them, I said, look, I'm down here for my mother. And imagine, and my mother put it out, she says, glad you're here, because she was really afraid. And then on top of that, there's another psychological, I'm saying this, I don't have the background, but I'll just say this. A lot of people who look like me, particularly down south, but everywhere in the country, talk about it's a fear of white people. And I say that not so much speaking for myself, because, and I think it's important to have conversations. I always say this: you don't have a black friend until you have a conversation with a black friend about what they experience, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very open about it. And one thing is that we are constantly concerned of being taken advantage of or anything else. But see, when I was growing up, my mom didn't put that in my head. An example: I read Life magazine, all these books. I read a book when I think I got when I was 12. It was called in the Matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer, which might sound rather timely, right? That book was this thick
Mm-hmm.
page. I still have it at my place in Oakland. But my point is, I never got it put in my head. I didn't have social media to communicate the idea that because I'm black, I didn't belong in any of those areas. So I was free to dream. Today, social media takes that away because it communicates, like I just showed you, right? All these negatives and everything,
Yes.
right? And so you have a group of kids, black kids, who grow up and come out thinking, hey, I'm not in it, so it's not for me. And that's thrown out there. And then you combine that with what Sir Clear did, and they're white and everything. I was explaining to the guy on the phone, I said, look, you can't have this image out there that you're taking advantage of people, particularly people who don't look like you and they're older. I said it's not right, and it's not even to the Lord, and that's where I got him. The turn I went to church, but
Mhm.
uh, you know, but it it's a heightened level of fear among us as Black folks. And I'm almost thinking that maybe social media should be destroyed, even though I benefit from it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But but I have this intense feeling that we're doing something wrong.
Yes, social media is very complicated, especially for teens. During the pandemic, of course, it actually served for teens to connect with their
Yeah.
friends, and it's very important in that developmental stage to be in connection with people, your friends, and that's the most important social network for teens. So it also made it possible for them to be in touch with their friends who may have moved away. And in some ways, it also gives more access to a creative expression, whether it's photography or writing, and also exposes to conversations like diversity and all of that. So there are benefits to it, especially during the pandemic. There were benefits to it because it helped people with a sense of community. However, there's of course also a lot of isolation and a lot of comparing that comes with social media, comparing of one's body or lifestyle or success based on what they see online, which can be very damaging. It also actually interferes with the ability to make assessments of their day-to-day life, even being present in day-to-day relationships, or that there's always that sense of urgency or that sense of presenting a certain way or dressing up a certain way for the posts rather than for their day-to-day life. So it's a very complicated medium. It does allow for accessibility and makes you more reachable. That's one benefit of it. You can connect with people around the world. For me, for instance, I follow therapists that are all over the world, and that's just an interesting thing to see how culture impacts the work that I do and how it looks different, and the conversations that happen in different areas of the world is just it's good to be able to have the access to that. But of course, it comes with a cost. So it needs to be balanced, and there needs to be awareness around it, especially for kids and teens.
What kind of, as we lead to the close, what kind of, when should a person call you to hire you?
I think, I mean, for me, I think there's always room for growth, and inner exploration is always valuable. So that's what I always say when we talk for the initial meeting with clients. So it all depends on the goals of what one needs to be, what one wants to accomplish. But we are never really done, right? Like it's never, this growth is never really done. But if somebody is recognizing certain patterns, like for instance, things that keep repeating, like the desire to seek approval or constantly needing to please others, disregarding their own emotions, having a hard time, really wanting close relationships, but having a hard time finding them or maintaining them, having poor boundaries, or having too many walls up. These kind of things are oftentimes really workable. We can actually really change these things, and it really changes the quality of our life and makes it possible for us to heal our inner child and heal and understand our needs first, and then heal them, so that we can actually live to our full potential, because these things get in the way of us actually being present in our lives and actually accomplishing what we really desire to accomplish and actually live a colorful life. So I would say, and as of course, needless to say, if there's any thoughts of harm, self-harm, or harming other people, or injurious behaviors, severe alcohol or substance use, of course, then it goes into more of a crisis and clinical intervention, coupled with talk therapy.
I was listening to you, I'm thinking it would be cool for you to have an app where if someone's feeling something or something, they can sort of dial up what what Dr. Balan would say, right?
There's an app for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it should be an app for you.
The interesting about that actually is that people heal in human connection, which is why this kind of job I think would be really hard to automate because but maybe we'll be able to manage that too. I don't know, but it feels like, because what happens in a therapeutic relationship, it's actually in some ways represents a parental relationship. So it's an unconditional relationship where the therapist gives room and compassion to the person's emotions and needs. And for many, this is a different experience. So we start doing something different in session, and we start learning, relating in different ways. And then that transfers outside of the session. So that's why everybody's therapeutic process looks very different. So there's not one way of doing this. And it's actually, besides all the theoretical approaches and the clinical, theories, it's more about just one person relating to another person in a safe place. That's what contributes to healing. Trust, basically.
Hey, doctor, your contact information is?
So my website is duygubalan.com, so my full name. And I'm also on Instagram at Duygu Balan. And I post a lot of updates there as well.
And thank you very much for that.
Yeah, of course.
And I have to get over my Instagram issue, and is that it doesn't have an effective YouTube style partner program, and I hate making content for the sake of it. I prefer it be monetized, right? So that's why I do everything on YouTube, because this is monetized. This is their ads with this, and this is a profession. But everywhere else, like I got over the idea of making tons of content just for the sake of it a long time ago, when I realized one can make money from it. That was a long time ago, yeah. But so there it's duygubalan.com. I got that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're on Instagram, of course. Follow her on Instagram, folks. And gotta have you back again. So
thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you working do you do research on top of that? Is anything,
Great conversation. So I do a private practice, and I am author. So I wrote a rewrite. It's a clinical workbook, and right now we're working with my husband together on a second one that's going to be more geared to teens. And I also do a lot of fiction work. So I just actually completed my novel, and it's on its publication, looking for a publication path for that, and just starting a second novel, because I think just
novel about
well, novel is also it's a coming of age story, and it also actually features a therapist character. So it's also about trauma and healing, because I really think that just making these kind of conversations accessible in mainstream media, in novels and movies, is really important, because it just reduces the feeling of loneliness. Because in trauma, a lot of times people just feel like they're the only ones going through a certain incident or certain feeling or experience, when that actually is not true. So through fiction, we are able to understand that this is something that happens, and normalize and feel connected to other people. And also it allows for expression in some ways. Sometimes it's easier to feel certain difficult emotions through another. That's why storytelling works through somebody else, like a character, through fiction, than it is to actually feel our own feelings. And then we're able to build awareness around it, and get more curious about it, and be able to process our own experiences, similar experiences as well. So I think it's very, very important. So that's why it's my mission to write novels that tackle untold stories and difficult topics, because it's important that we talk about them. Otherwise, we create more soil for these dysfunctions and these traumas to keep continuing and repeating. Yeah.
Outstanding. Hey, Doc, stick around behind the curtain, or in the background, or off stage, as I like to say.
Will do. Thank you.
thank you all for your support. And oh, by the way, stay tuned for, maybe I should give everybody a sneak peek at what's coming. But this, at the end of the week, will be officially launched. I've been working on it for a bit. I had it in my head for some time. It was originally based on a situation I was trying to straighten out, which I will present. But what it is the Zenny Report, but it's called ZennyReport.com. And if you've ever heard the Drudge Report, I was originally going to do that style, but it's basically, I thought, I've got all of these press releases from the White House, and I get them on a regular daily basis, but I'm not using them. And then when I send out these newsletters, I put them in these heads in the email. I thought, nah, people want this format where they can read what's happening, but it's not officially ready yet. I'm giving you a sneak peek. That's all you get to see. So anyway,
that's advertisement right there.
Yeah, and so I'll feature videos, including my discussion with you. I'll transcribe them and all that. But now I will have we will have, as a company, 5 main WordPress websites.
Wow.
And we have 100 total. So anyway, all right, folks, I'm going to chew the doctor's ear for a bit backstage. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube, bookmark oaklandnewsnowblog.com, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Wrong button I pushed. Sorry about that. I didn't even end the broadcast. I pushed the wrong buttons. Folks, it's been that kind of day.